Mike Bernard with us on Friday morning, as he always is. Mike's hard to believe that we are in year 8 of Inside the Numbers here on Game Day Sports Radio.
No,
And this
year 9, calendar year.
year, is it?
Yeah,
Well, yeah, I guess so. That's exactly right. I guess we're completing our 8th season going into year 9.
yeah,
Is that the way it works?
yeah. It is, and more than 1,000 college football games down, and we're down to one.
Yeah. I remember when we had our first show this season back in August with college football. Uh, it would not have surprised me to say that Georgia was going to be in the national championship game, but TCU, yeah, that caught me off guard. And of course, now we're going to look back at TCU and Michigan and Ohio State and Georgia, and of course, preview the national championship game. But before we get into that, were there any other bowls that caught your eye and kind of surprised you? Maybe Tulane, USC, Alabama, Kansas State. Anything jump out at you over this bowl season?
Many of them did, but those two you mentioned, that Cotton Bowl, hey, USC and Lincoln Riley, they choked when it got tight. I mean, Coach, slow developing run/draw play from deep in your end zone, you're up 8.
Yeah.
I mean, this is peewee football. You can't make those mistakes. In that situation, the worst they can do in regulation is get tied, right? So the only way Tulane can win in regulation is for them to run that play. You've got to run quarterback sneak. And, that was a colossal fail. That game, USC wasn't ready. They were relegated to the Cotton Bowl. They were more talented, but Tulane wanted the game. And then couple that with the mistakes they made down the stretch. Great win for Tulane. I mean,
Yeah.
they don't get to the Cotton Bowl very often. What was that Sean King team back around 2000 went undefeated? Was Terry
Bowden the Liberty
coach?
Bowl?
Yeah, right.
Tommy Bowden was the coach. They played in the Liberty Bowl. That was the best they could do. And so I think the last major bowl win they had was like in the Sugar Bowl in their home stadium, the old Tulane Stadium, back in like 1934.
Yeah. So that was a great win for them. The Sugar Bowl, speaking of the Sugar Bowl, Alabama, K-State, it started out like a lot of these bowl games do when you have a potentially uninterested blue blood. K-State went out 10-0, but the Tide did not go flat like their past teams did, or some other teams, not just Alabama. When they feel like they're relegated to another bowl, I'm telling you, Coach, these kids don't give two flips about New Year's Six, and that means nothing to them, especially if you're top tier and you're expected to be in the college football playoff every year. It's been a long time since those losses for Alabama to Utah and Oklahoma in those Sugar Bowls. So maybe they're a little bit immune to that.
Maybe so, and also we saw a lot of these bowl games like the. And again, I know it would have been seeded differently, but think about it. Had we been we just a couple of seasons from now, Alabama, Kansas State, and USC Tulane would have been a playoff game.
Yeah. And, I always think back to that 2017 year. That was the year you most needed the expanded playoff. And now, I don't know if we won't get it next year, right? But it'll be 24.
If they can get the money lined up, we'll get it next year, but it will probably be 24 before it happens.
Well, I certainly look forward to that because, again, you're going to reduce the amount of relegation bowls.
Yeah.
Okay. Because in the blue bloods and the good old boys, they don't want to talk about their bowl being meaningless, but frankly, that's just what it's been.
Correct. And not really meaningless, but historically, since we got into the playoffs, most of the semifinal games really have been duds. I mean, not this year, but before this season, before this past weekend, The closest combined point differential in the semifinals was that 2017-18 season that you mentioned, and that was a 24-point difference. Georgia beat Oklahoma in 2 overtimes by 6, and then Alabama beat Clemson, I believe, in the Sugar Bowl 24-6. But this year, only 7 points separated in these 2 games, and I'll tell you, I think they were both entertaining. And based upon everything that transpired during the season, I think the committee got it right. I think they got the right 4 teams in.
The before this season, favorites in the semifinals were 9-1 straight up, 7-3 against the spread the last 5 years. To your point of they weren't close. This year, both games were very close. And Coach, all time, there have been 16 semifinal games before this season. Only 3 were decided by single digits. And, of course, this year both were one-score games. That trend was busted. So it was very entertaining. And, you had 4 great teams, and TCU surprised, especially up front.
Yeah, both games were where the team behind had the ball basically at the end of the game with a chance to win it. So it wasn't like before. I remember in some of these semifinal games with about 5 minutes to go in the game, you look in the stadium and it's empty because everyone's gone.
Right.
Not this year. Everyone was there. Now, earlier this week in production meetings, you pointed out something that I thought was quite humorous.
Right. I saw, of course, I didn't come up with this, but I saw it. So Sonny Dykes, he won his only playoff appearance. So he's 1-0. So that means he has more playoff wins than Jimbo Fisher, Lincoln Riley, Harbaugh, Brian Kelly, Ryan Day, Bob Stoops, D'Antonio, Chris Peterson, and Luke Fickell, all of those combined, because it is a tough gig, right? Remember, it's basically been the Alabama, Clemson, Ohio State show, and then here lately, Georgia, and you mix in that 2019 LSU team, it's a very small fraternity. So he's bust right in and gets his win right out of the gate.
And I'm going to go out on a limb here, and I'm going to say that TCU and Sonny Dykes, I think that they have the highest winning percentage as of today in the college football playoffs. Sonny Dykes is undefeated. TCU's undefeated. Matter of fact, TCU's got a better record percentage-wise than Alabama, Georgia, Clemson, anyone.
Yeah, and to that list of coaches, because, we're poking fun at like a lot of the hyperbolic nonsense that the media brings out. But to that point, so Sonny Dykes also has more playoff wins than Bear Bryant, Bud Wilkinson. Of course, they didn't play in it, but that's the type of narrative you'll hear.
Exactly.
But on a serious note, I was really impressed with, again, they gave up, 45 points, but up front, they got stops when they had to, and they played their game.
Yeah, again, the game didn't play out as expected, because if you had told me the Wolverines would score 45, I'd say they win. But I didn't count on that great defensive game plan by the Frogs, and I know they gave up 45, but it was still a great plan. The 2 pick sixes, they were huge. And at points in the game, Jim Harbaugh, he, in my opinion, stopped being Jim Harbaugh. Case in point, the first drive of the game, he drives it down the field. They get going straight at TCU. They're moving the ball. And then on the 2, on 4th down, he calls some type of reverse play. But again, the Frogs stayed at home, big stop for them, and kind of changed the momentum early on into their favor. And it was just a head scratcher if you look at Harbaugh's tendencies in the past.
Right. And look, I've given him credit. Even because strategy-wise and game management, he's the best there is, okay? Even that year that Michigan State blocked the punt, he had worked the clock to a perfect time to where if Michigan State didn't block it and return it for a touchdown, there would be no time left.
Right.
In this game, Coach, he didn't coach his game. I mean, he does that reverse, pitchy woo-woo. from the 2. And plus, first of all, he should have kicked the field goal there because that's who he is, right?
Get your point.
That sends the statement of like, hey, we're just going to kick this field goal because we're physically better.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we're superior. And he didn't. He coached like he was the underdog.
Yeah, he sure did. Moving on to Georgia, Ohio State, 42-41. Stetson Bennett showed in the fourth quarter what makes him so special. He had 190 yards passing in the fourth quarter alone. And had they voted for the Heisman this week, Bennett would have won going away. You know, I hate it for Ruggs, the Buckeyes kicker, that it came down to that play, and wish it hadn't. But this game was a classic heavyweight bout.
Coach, the Ohio State kicker, the fans won't remember this, and people, you know, on angry Twitter are out saying, what was he doing? Because they're ignorant, right?
Yeah.
But
correct.
the fact of the matter is if he doesn't kick that long field goal prior to that, a field goal's not even in play there, right?
Exactly.
And of course, you know, he was tight. When a right-handed athlete misses something to the left, whether it's golf or tennis or a field goal kicker, that means you're tight more often than not. But who wouldn't be, right? It's you know, and it doesn't fall on him. Ohio State had their chances. They actually led the game 59 minutes, and they were in a great spot. They just came up short. And I remember week 1, I was looking at Oregon and Georgia and thinking, how is Georgia going to lay this number and come back and follow up that season when they lost 15 or so players to the league, another 15 or 20 to the portal? And I'm like, I understand the philosophy or the narrative of Georgia reloads. I just didn't think they would do it. And here we are already in January, and they don't have a loss.
Yeah. Going back to Ruggs real quick, again, as you said, when he you know, his dominant foot kicking with his right foot, and also you combine him being just a little tight as anyone would be, and also the fact that it was so long, you've got to drive that. So you've got to. It's almost like trying to pull a drive on a long par 5, and you know, and so all that combined again. You know, it wasn't a good look for him at the end of the game. But as you mentioned, if it wasn't for him, Ohio State wouldn't have been in the position that they were in anyway.
Right. They would have been throwing a Hail Mary.
Right. All right. Let's move on to Monday night, TCU, Georgia, SoFi Stadium. You know, the biggest story that I've heard come out of this so far this week is when everyone got their parking credentials, SoFi Stadium is not going to allow tailgating on site.
I read that too, and that's not going to go over well for teams from Georgia and Texas. That's a part of the
culture. That's
there.
it. Yeah, it really is. Well, as far as the game goes, Mike, on paper and in Vegas, where you are, the Frogs, they don't stack up with the Dogs. However, at this point, I don't think TCU really cares.
No, they don't. And, you know, they've heard that they don't belong. And you and I and countless other pundits of all year have said, okay, well, you know, they got away with that. They came back from 18 down, and they can't keep doing this. Well, again, we're already in 2023, and they still haven't, you know, they're still here. They have a loss, but they did what they had to do. And, you know, again, physically, I haven't heard much talk about this, but, and I'm not saying to give him credit, but Gary Patterson, he recruited a player that went against the grain of the Big 12.
Yeah,
as far as physical attributes and that could play up front. And I think that's a big reason you combine those players with Sonny Dykes, who's been as cool as can be. I mean, that guy's been, and his players kind of, you know, they follow that. They see that he doesn't get rattled. Remember the Baylor game when he knew that he had time. He felt confident in his special teams. And after the game, the media was just all up in arms, like, oh my God, what were you thinking? He's like, we do that all the time in practice.
Yeah, most of the time when you see the run on field goal, it ends up being a false start or too many men on the field or don't get to play off in time. It's just too rushed. again, they did it to perfection that day. And again, to your point, I think that just speaks of that team's confidence in their head coach and that coach's confidence in his team. For me, though, this game Monday night comes down to if the Frogs can protect Max Duggan. I mean, they showed against Michigan that they can hold their own against a big physical defensive line. However, the Wolverines, they don't have the speed that this Georgia defense has. And if Duggan doesn't have time, the Frogs have no chance. They can only win this game in a shootout. It's got to be a high-scoring affair. Defensive battle greatly favors Georgia. But, that being said, we talked about the pressures of November, and I've been preaching the demise of TCU since October. And listen, they, again, except for that small blimp in Kansas State in the Big 12 championship game, which, again, that game came down to the last play. TCU could have easily won that game. But, again, the demise of TCU and Sonny Dykes, as Mark Twain said, the rumors of my death are greatly exaggerated because they're still here.
Yeah, they are. And, in hindsight, this is more for college basketball, but a lot of times you have a team that gets on they're say 17-0. You don't want that team to come into the tournament I believe it was the 2015 Kentucky team that was outstanding, and they were 32-0 but lost to Wisconsin. Along those lines, I think that TCU losing in the Big 12 title game grounded them a little bit. They didn't lose confidence because they came back, took it to overtime, and had a chance to win. But it also could have maybe had helped Michigan lower their guard a little bit, saying, hey, this team, they lost to a 3-loss K-State team. They don't say these things out loud, but it goes through their mind. Sure. So I think that may have benefited them having that loss. And they proved that the committee made a good decision putting them in with that loss.
Right. As far as the numbers go, of course, we talked about the big number that Vegas has up there. At this point in time, though, again, you look at Georgia, they've got to come in this game with a ton of confidence because this is where everyone expected them to be. TCU, though, you can understand, or I guess from my standpoint, I look at it from the outside. I can understand why Vegas has such a large point difference on this game. But since the early line came out, Mike, how has this game played out? Because, again, during our time together, you've kind of taught me why and how the line moves. How has it played out since the initial quote of the line?
The opening, yeah. It opened yes. 13. It touched 14 for a second, and then it went down. Now you can find 12 and 12.5, so TCU's getting some favor there. And we talk about the disparity. If you add up all the 4 and 5 stars on Georgia and put them against TCU, it's even a bigger disparity. But they don't play the game based off point spreads and how many your recruiting angle or your recruiting grade. Mm-hmm. And again, Sonny Dykes has been cool hand Luke all year. His players have just seen that and followed suit.
Mm-hmm. All right, now we talked about how you had over in both the semifinal games, and you hit on.
I also had Michigan. I had Ohio State. I had two overs, which won Ohio State, but I also had Michigan, and they got embarrassed.
Okay, all right. So, what are you looking at for Monday night?
Okay, so as we talked about, we kept waiting for TCU to lose. And, as far as the side, it looks like the point spread, even though it went down, the point spread tells me Georgia's going to win this game. If they played it 3 times, they would win it by 2 touchdowns or more, 2 of the 3. But they only play it once. So I'm going to look to the total. As you said, I played over in both the semifinal games, which I'm normally an under player, but I'll play whatever the line warrants. And overs are 6-2 in championship games. They're normally indoors or in an outdoor stadium that has very good weather. And the general public is going to be all over the over here. I think the fact that Sonny Dykes is shown in these big games, he doesn't panic. He doesn't fake punts and run triple reverses. I see both teams coming in a little tight early, and that'll help the game stay under.
You know, one thing that I noticed Kirby Smart, as soon as the game was over, he started bad mouthing his team. Gosh, we played awful. We've got to start listening. We've got to start being, we got to be coachable. We've got to do this. Hey, all that is making sure he's doing his best to make sure that his guys are not overconfident going into Monday night.
Yeah, and they've done a very good job of staying grounded. I mean, look, how many games in a row have they won? Well, you take out they avenged the Alabama loss, but you take that out, were they 25-1 or something? I mean, it's hard to keep a team focused when you're that dominant. I don't think they'll take TCU for granted. I think Georgia wins. Not sure if they cover. The point spread says maybe they probably cover the big number, but I'm going to go with under here. Under,
okay. Well, listen, we're going to give you Monday off since the game's Monday night, and we'll recap both NFL and this national championship game on Tuesday morning. So enjoy your extended weekend from Game Day Sports Radio.
Same to you, Coach. I appreciate any time off, and it was a fun college football season. It was a good one, but it's time to move on to other sports. So I think we're going to have a good finale.
Yeah, I'm in honor of Mike Leach. I'm wearing my Mississippi State hat that my son Cater gave me when he played at Mississippi State. Oh gosh, over 10 years ago now. But
oh my gosh,
yeah,
it's been that long since he was there.
Yeah.
I guess so. He got married. Time flies.
The time does fly, and so but I always kept it in the closet, and I don't think I've ever worn it until today. But I thought this was an appropriate time to pull it out, and kudos to Mississippi State for staying focused and winning an ugly game versus Illinois on that. But anyway, Mike, appreciate your time, and we will of course be with you on Tuesday morning, and you have a great weekend.
Coach, always my pleasure. Take care.